Most people think outboard engines fail because something breaks, a piston snaps, a gearbox explodes, smoke pours out, and that's the end of the story. But that's not how most budget outboards actually ruin people. The engine usually still runs, it starts, it idles, it even pushes the boat. And yet the owner quietly loses thousands anyway. Not in one dramatic moment, but in slow, expensive pieces that never show up on a spec sheet or a dealer brochure. And here's the part nobody tells you. By the time you realize what went wrong, you're already trapped. The money is gone, the season is gone, and the engine that looked like a steal is suddenly the most expensive thing you own. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you a survival checklist that eliminates bad outboards before they ever touch water. Not brands, not opinions, pass or fail. And one of these checks matters more than horsepower, more than price, more than warranty length. Almost nobody checks it. Most buyers don't even know it exists. And if you miss it, nothing else you do will save you. Before we get to the checklist, there's a problem we need to clear out first. Because if you don't understand this, everything that follows will sound obvious, or worse, unnecessary. The problem is reviews. Not fake reviews, not paid reviews, real ones, the kind people trust, the kind that convince buyers they've done their homework. Reviews feel safe because they're emotional. Someone bought the engine, they installed it, they ran it, they're happy. 5 stars. But reviews don't measure survival. They measure first impressions. And first impressions in boating are dangerously misleading. Reviews almost never capture that moment. When a sensor fails mid-season, when a software update bricks the motor, when a warning code appears and the engine goes into limp mode, when you call the dealer and hear, "We're booked for 6 weeks," that's when the real cost begins. And that experience rarely turns into a review, because by then the owner is frustrated, embarrassed, or already trying to sell the boat. Silence replaces stars. This is why 2 buyers can purchase the same engine, pay the same price, and have completely opposite outcomes. One calls it a bargain, the other calls it a nightmare. And the difference has almost nothing to do with the engine itself. It has to do with what surrounds it, the support structure, the parts pipeline, the people allowed to touch it. Reviews don't see that. They can't. They end too early. So if reviews don't tell you whether an engine will survive ownership, what does? That's where the survival checklist comes in. It ignores performance. It ignores marketing. It ignores promises. Each engine faces a series of pass or fail tests. Fail one and the engine is eliminated, no matter how good it looks on paper. In the next section, we're starting with the first test. It's the earliest point where engines quietly fail, and it's the one that removes more great deals from consideration than any other. Most buyers think they've already checked it. They haven't. And once you hear how it really works, you'll realize why so many boats end up sitting unused even though the engine technically still runs. And that misunderstanding is where the real losses begin, because the failure isn't loud or obvious or dramatic. It just quietly drains time, money, and patience while owners keep telling themselves the next call will fix it until the season slips away without warning entirely, slowly. Before we go any further, you need to understand how this checklist actually works, because this is where most people misunderstand what I'm about to do. This is not a ranking. It's not a comparison. It's not about which engine is better. Those conversations always collapse into brand loyalty and comment wars. This is different. This is a survival test. Pass or fail. Nothing in between. Here's the rule that makes people uncomfortable. One failure cancels everything else. It doesn't matter if the engine is smooth. It doesn't matter if it's fuel efficient. It doesn't matter if it was cheap or quiet or came with a long warranty. If it fails one survival check, the ownership experience collapses later. Not immediately, not dramatically, but inevitably. That's why people feel blindsided. They didn't buy a bad engine. They bought an engine that couldn't survive the system around it. Think of it like this. If an engine performs perfectly but can't get parts when something small breaks, it fails. If parts exist but no certified technician can touch it, it fails. If warranty coverage exists but repairs take months, it fails. If everything works but resale traps you financially, it still fails. Survival isn't about excellence in one area. It's about not collapsing in any of them. This is also why spec sheets are irrelevant here. Horsepower doesn't survive ownership. Torque curves don't survive ownership. Even reliability stats don't survive ownership if support collapses. The checklist doesn't ask, how good is this engine? It asks a much colder question. Can this engine continue to exist in your life without draining time, money, or seasons? That's a very different standard. Now here's the part most buyers get wrong. They think passing one test compensates for failing another. They think a low price offsets inconvenience, or strong performance offsets weak dealer support, or a long warranty offsets parts delays. It doesn't. Those trade-offs only exist on paper. In real ownership, failures stack. They compound. A weak area doesn't stay isolated. It spreads into everything else. That's why this checklist is ordered. The early tests eliminate engines long before emotions get involved. And the first test isn't mechanical. It's not performance-related. It doesn't involve how the engine runs at all. In fact, this is the test that catches people off guard, because most buyers are convinced they've already checked it. They'll tell you parts are available. They'll point to catalogs, websites, PDFs, dealer assurances. But availability on paper and survivability in reality are not the same thing. This test isn't about whether parts exist somewhere in the world. It's about whether parts exist when you actually need them, in the time frame that keeps ownership viable. It's about delays, substitutions, back orders, quiet discontinuations, shipping bottlenecks. It's about the difference between a boat that misses a weekend and a boat that misses an entire season. And this is where engines that look identical on day one start to separate fast. In a moment, we're going to apply the first survival test. And once you see how it really works, you'll realize why so many engines that seem safe never make it past this point. You'll also understand why owners keep defending engines that are actively costing them money. Because admitting failure here means admitting the deal was never a deal at all. And once that realization hits, most people don't walk away. They double down, they wait, they hope. They tell themselves the next shipment will fix everything, that the delay is temporary, that the problem is rare, that they're just unlucky. And that's exactly how engines quietly fail without ever actually breaking. Because the first survival test doesn't announce itself. It just starts the clock. And most buyers don't even realize time is what they're losing until it's already gone. And the part that finally arrives doesn't solve the real problem, because the real problem was never the part itself, but everything that had to happen around it to make ownership viable in the first place. And once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it, because it shows up again and again and again, especially with budget outboards, where the price made sense, but the system never did. This is the first real test. And it's the one that quietly eliminates more engines than anything else on this checklist. Parts survivability. Not parts availability, survivability. That difference is everything. When people say parts are available, what they usually mean is that parts exist somewhere. A warehouse, a distributor, a factory, maybe even a website with a buy button. That sounds reassuring, and it's usually where buyers stop thinking. But ownership doesn't care where parts exist. Ownership cares how fast a problem stops your boat from being usable. And this is where the math changes. Here's the reality. Most outboard failures aren't catastrophic. They're small. Sensors, seals, fuel system components, electronics. Things that cost a few $100s, not thousands. But those small parts have a massive leverage effect, because a $20 sensor can disable a $30,000 boat. And once that happens, the only thing that matters is time. Time waiting for confirmation, time waiting for approval, time waiting for shipping, time waiting for installation. Each delay stacks. And this is where engines that look identical on paper start to separate. One engine gets a part in 3 days. Another gets a vague estimate, 2 to 4 weeks, back-ordered. We're waiting on the factory. And suddenly, the difference between those engines isn't performance. It's whether your season survives. Part survivability isn't about worst-case disasters. It's about normal friction. How often parts are actually stocked locally. How often substitutes are allowed. How often revisions quietly replace older components. How often part numbers change without warning. Budget engines are especially vulnerable here because supply chains are tighter and margins are thinner. When something slows down upstream, it shows up downstream immediately. And here's the part most buyers don't realize. Parts don't fail in isolation. They fail during peak season, when everyone needs the same thing at the same time, when shipping lanes are congested, when dealers are overwhelmed. That's when survivability is tested, not in winter, not during launch prep, but when the water is warm and the calendar matters. This is why owners defend engines that are actively failing them, because from their perspective, nothing is broken. They're just waiting for a shipment, waiting for an update, waiting for a tracking number that keeps moving, waiting for a call that never comes. And every week feels tolerable in isolation. One more week, one more delay, until suddenly half the season is gone and the engine that was supposed to save money has quietly erased its own advantage. Another hidden failure mode lives right here: substitutions. When the exact part isn't available, replacements are offered. Different revision, slightly different spec. It should work. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it introduces a new problem. And now you're not just waiting for parts, you're diagnosing secondary issues caused by temporary fixes. That's how small delays turn into cascading ones. Engines that pass this test tend to share a few traits: strong local stocking, stable part numbers, multiple suppliers, clear logistics. Engines that fail rely heavily on centralized distribution and optimistic timelines, and the buyer almost never knows which system they're buying into, because both engines look the same sitting on a transom. So here's the pass or fail logic. If a single delayed part can realistically sideline your boat for weeks during peak season, the engine fails this test. Not because it's bad, not because it's unreliable, but because ownership can't survive that level of fragility. And this failure doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with smoke or noise. It starts quietly, with a phone call, then an email, then silence. If an engine passes here, it moves on. If it fails, everything else becomes irrelevant. Performance, efficiency, price, warranty, none of it matters if the system can't keep the engine alive in real time. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Many engines people call great value never make it past this first gate. But even engines that survive parts don't automatically survive ownership, because there's a second bottleneck waiting, one that catches buyers completely off guard. Parts can exist, parts can arrive, and the engine can still be unusable, because the next test isn't about what you can buy, it's about who is allowed to touch it and when. And that's where the survival math gets even harsher, because availability without access creates a different kind of failure, one that looks solved on paper but remains completely stuck in reality. While the boat sits ready, the water waits, and the clock keeps moving without caring whether the part is finally on a shelf or not. This is where a lot of owners get confused, because on the surface it looks like the problem is solved. The part finally arrives, the box is on the counter, the engine should be fixed, and yet the boat still doesn't move. That's because part survivability and service survivability are two completely different tests, and passing the first one doesn't guarantee you pass the second. Service survivability is about access, not access in theory. Access when it matters. When the engine throws a code in June, when everyone else is also trying to get on the water, when shops are booked solid and emergency jobs take priority. Warranty work often drops to the bottom of the list because it pays less, and suddenly a perfectly legitimate issue turns into a waiting game. 2 weeks, then 4, then we'll call you. And during that time, nothing is technically wrong with the engine. It's just unavailable. And unavailable engines fail ownership just as thoroughly as broken ones. This is where budget outboards often struggle, not because they're poorly built, but because their service ecosystems are fragile. Fewer certified techs means fewer appointment slots. Fewer slots means longer delays. Longer delays mean missed water time. And missed water time is the one cost nobody budgets for, because it doesn't show up on invoices. It shows up as canceled trips, unused fuel, storage fees, and the quiet realization that summer doesn't wait for parts or people. Another layer makes this worse: technician turnover. Certified techs leave, shops change brands, dealers drop lines that aren't profitable to support, and suddenly the place that sold you the engine no longer services it. The warranty still exists, the parts still exist, but access collapses. And now you're calling around, explaining your situation to shops that didn't sell you the motor and don't have any incentive to prioritize you. This is why service survivability is a separate gate. An engine passes only if multiple service paths realistically exist within reach, not just one friendly dealer, not just a promise. Redundancy matters here. Because when access disappears, owners don't usually panic right away. They wait, they assume it's temporary, they believe the delay will resolve itself, and that waiting period is where ownership starts bleeding value quietly. If an engine fails this test, it doesn't matter how quickly parts arrive, it doesn't matter how simple the repair is. Without timely access to qualified hands, the engine becomes inert, a solved problem that stays unsolved. And the longer it sits, the harder it becomes to mentally justify the purchase, because at this point, admitting failure means admitting the system you bought into was never designed to support you at scale. But even engines that survive service access aren't safe yet, because the next layer gives buyers a false sense of security. It feels like protection. It's written in bold print. It's often used to justify risk. And it's the reason many buyers stay in bad situations longer than they should. Warranty survivability looks solid on paper, it sounds reassuring in conversations, and it is one of the most misunderstood concepts in outboard ownership, because what it promises and what it delivers are very different things once something actually goes wrong, and the clock starts moving, and that gap between expectation and reality is where frustration quietly turns into resignation, and most people don't even realize they've crossed that line yet. Warranty survivability is where optimism goes to die. On paper, this is the safety net, the thing that's supposed to make risk acceptable. Long coverage periods, big numbers, years instead of months. It feels like protection, and that feeling is powerful because it encourages buyers to ignore earlier warning signs. Even if something goes wrong, it's covered. That sentence alone keeps a lot of people from walking away when they should. But here's the uncomfortable reality. A warranty does not repair an engine. A warranty authorizes a process, and that process is slow, layered, and full of friction that most buyers never see until they're already inside it. The first misunderstanding is speed. People assume warranty means priority. It usually means the opposite. Warranty jobs often pay less than customer pay work. That affects scheduling quietly. No one says it out loud, but when bays are full, decisions get made. Urgent fishing trip tomorrow, customer paying out of pocket, dealer-owned boat, and somewhere lower on the list, a warranty claim waiting for approval. The engine isn't denied, it's delayed, and delays are invisible on paper. Then there's the approval chain: diagnosis, documentation, photos, serial numbers, logs, submission, review, questions, resubmission. Each step adds time, and none of it counts as repair yet. During this phase, the boat sits, the owner calls. The answer is always the same: we're waiting. Waiting on the manufacturer, waiting on authorization, waiting on a response. And this is where the emotional shift happens. At first, buyers feel protected. Then they feel patient. Then they feel stuck. Another hidden failure point lives here: coverage exclusions, wear items, environmental factors, improper use, improper storage, improper installation, gray areas that don't look gray until something breaks. Warranty survivability isn't about whether coverage exists. It's about how hard it is to actually activate it in real time during the season that matters. This is why warranties keep people in bad ownership situations longer than they should be in them. The promise of future resolution delays present action. Owners wait instead of cutting losses. They tell themselves the fix is coming. They rationalize downtime because it's covered. And by the time the repair finally happens, the season is gone, the excitement is gone, and the financial damage has already been done quietly through lost use, rather than repair bills. An engine passes this test only if warranty support is fast, predictable, and integrated smoothly with service access. Not just generous on paper, not just long. Survivability here is about whether protection actually protects time, not just parts. And many engines that look safe because of warranty length never survive this gate once real friction is introduced. At this point, the checklist usually feels heavy. Everything sounds like risk. Everything sounds like loss. And this is where people expect the story to stay negative. Cheap fails, premium survives. End of discussion. But that assumption is wrong. There are situations where budget engines survive better than expected, where the system holds, where the outcome surprises people who thought price alone decided everything. This is the moment where attention resets, because once you see an unexpected pass, you realize the checklist isn't biased, it's indifferent. It doesn't care about reputation or assumptions, it only cares about outcomes. And that's important, because the engine you assume will fail doesn't always do so, and the one you assume is safe sometimes quietly collapses under a different kind of pressure that has nothing to do with parts or service or warranty, and everything to do with time itself, and how expensive time becomes when ownership drags on without resolution. This is where the checklist catches people off guard, because up to now, everything sounds like a warning. Delays, bottlenecks, fragile systems. And the assumption most viewers are making at this point is simple. Cheap engines fail, expensive engines survive. But that assumption doesn't hold once you actually watch what happens over time. There are budget engines that pass this checklist, not because they're perfect, not because they're built better than premium options, but because the system around them holds together just enough. Parts move, service access exists, warranty friction stays manageable, nothing collapses at the same time. And that's all survivability really is, not excellence, stability. So let's be clear. Price alone doesn't decide survival. Some inexpensive engines survive because they're boring, mature designs, shared components, simple systems, nothing exotic, nothing fragile. They don't promise the world, but they don't overload the support structure either. And this is exactly why assumptions are dangerous. Buyers assume budget means risky, so they overcompensate. They assume premium means safe, so they stop checking. And that's where the next failure hides, because even engines that survive parts, service, and warranty can still destroy value in a way that has nothing to do with repairs at all. This next test has nothing to do with what breaks. It has to do with how long everything takes. Because time is the one cost nobody calculates. Nobody writes it down. Nobody sees it coming. But time is the multiplier that turns small problems into expensive ones. Downtime survivability isn't about whether an engine eventually gets fixed. It's about whether the delay itself makes ownership irrational. A boat that misses one weekend is inconvenient. A boat that misses 6 weeks starts changing how you feel about it. A boat that misses an entire season stops feeling like an asset and starts feeling like a mistake. Here's what people don't realize. Downtime costs don't show up as a single bill. They spread out. Storage fees continue. Insurance continues. Registration continues. Loan payments continue. Slip fees continue. Fuel you plan to use goes unused. Trips get canceled. Friends stop asking. And none of that gets blamed on the engine directly. It just quietly accumulates in the background. This is why downtime survivability is its own gate. 2 engines can cost the same to repair. One gets fixed in a week, the other takes 8. The repair bill is identical. The ownership outcome is not. One owner shrugs it off. The other starts questioning the entire purchase. And once that doubt sets in, it doesn't go away just because the engine eventually runs again. Engines fail this test when delays stack across multiple areas. Waiting for parts, waiting for service, waiting for approval. Each wait feels manageable on its own. Together, they erase time. And time is the one thing boating doesn't forgive. Seasons don't pause. Weather windows don't wait. Summer doesn't care that your claim is approved. An engine passes downtime survivability only if issues resolve fast enough that ownership still feels intact. Not perfect, intact. And this is where even good engines sometimes fail, because nothing technically went wrong, yet everything took too long. And here's the uncomfortable part. Even if an engine survives all of this, even if parts arrive, service happens, warranty resolves, and downtime stays tolerable, there is still one final test waiting. The one most buyers never think about until they're already trying to get out. Because survival doesn't end with keeping the boat running. It ends with whether you can actually leave without paying for every mistake twice. And that final test doesn't care how the engine ran or how patient you were. It only cares about what the market believes once you're done. And that belief determines whether ownership closes cleanly or drags on long after you're ready to move on. Because resale is not about value, it's about escape. And the moment you need that escape is the moment everything else suddenly becomes very clear. Resale survivability is the last gate, and it's the one that hurts the most because by the time you reach it, the money's already spent. This isn't about depreciation charts or blue book numbers. This is about liquidity, how fast you can exit, how cleanly you can walk away, and whether the market wants what you're trying to sell. Here's the mistake most owners make. They think resale value is about how well the engine ran. It's not. Buyers don't buy your experience, they buy perception, reputation, familiarity, service confidence. And that perception exists long before they ever see your boat in person. Some engines attract calls immediately. Others sit. Weeks go by. Messages slow down. Offers come in low, if they come in at all. And that's when the trap closes. An engine can run perfectly and still fail this test, because resale survivability isn't about condition alone. It's about how many people are willing to take the risk you're trying to offload. Thin service networks shrink buyer pools. Limited parts histories scare people away. Unfamiliar brands raise questions buyers don't want to answer. And suddenly, the engine that saved money on the way in costs money on the way out. This is where great deals quietly erase themselves. Owners discount to move faster, then discount again, then accept trades they didn't plan on. Or they keep the boat longer than they wanted to, not because they love it, but because selling feels worse than waiting. That's not ownership success, that's financial gravity. Engines that pass this test tend to share one trait: the market understands them. Buyers know what they're getting into. Shops know how to support them. Parts are familiar. Risks feel bounded. Engines that fail here aren't always bad, they're just uncertain. And uncertainty is expensive. Once you understand this, the checklist finally snaps into focus. It's not about avoiding cheap engines. It's about avoiding fragile ownership, parts, service, warranty, downtime, resale. Each gate strips away another illusion. And by the time you reach the end, very few engines remain standing. But here's where most people expect a list: names, winners, losers. And that's not what happens next. Because the checklist isn't meant to tell you what to buy. It's meant to tell you how to think, how to ask questions that make dealers uncomfortable, how to spot risk before it becomes personal, how to walk away without second-guessing yourself. The moment you apply this checklist before buying, something interesting happens. Sales conversations change. Promises get vague. Confidence shifts. Because when you stop asking about horsepower and start asking about support, the room gets quieter. And that silence tells you more than any spec sheet ever could. Most people never do this. They buy first, they rationalize later, and by the time the system reveals itself, they're already invested emotionally and financially. The checklist flips that order. It forces the system to prove itself before you commit. And once you start seeing ownership this way, you can't unsee it. You'll notice which engines survive quietly year after year. You'll see which boats disappear mid-season. You'll recognize the difference between a problem that's fixable and a problem that just takes too long to matter anymore. Because at the end of the day, cheap engines don't ruin people. Fragile systems do. And the real mistake isn't buying the wrong outboard. It's buying into an ownership structure that was never designed to carry you through the moments when things stop being easy and start testing your patience, your calendar, your expectations, and your ability to walk away cleanly when the time comes. Because once you're inside that system, the checklist no longer protects you. It just explains what's already happening. And the only question left is whether you see it early enough to change course or late enough that continuing feels easier than admitting you should have paused. And that pause right there is where most buyers hesitate, because they're still hoping the next season will be different. Most people don't lose money on outboards because they chose the wrong brand. They lose it because they asked the wrong questions at the wrong time. They focused on what was easy to compare: price, horsepower, features, warranty length, all the things that look concrete, all the things that feel safe. And they ignored the parts that only show themselves later, when changing course is already expensive. The checklist isn't magic. It doesn't guarantee happiness. What it does is force reality to show up early, before the paperwork, before the excitement, before the first launch. It exposes whether the system behind the engine can actually carry ownership without collapsing under normal pressure. Not worst-case disasters, normal use, normal delays, normal problems that happen to almost everyone eventually. When you apply it before buying, something subtle shifts. You stop chasing deals. You stop arguing specs. You stop trying to win on paper. Instead, you start looking for stability. You start asking questions that don't have rehearsed answers. How many techs actually service this? How long common parts really take in summer? What happens if this dealer stops carrying the brand? What resale actually looks like, not in theory, but in practice. And the answers you get aren't always comfortable. Sometimes they're vague. Sometimes they're confident until you push once more. Sometimes the conversation ends faster than you expect. That's not a bad sign. That's information. Silence is information. Hesitation is information. Overconfidence is information. The checklist turns those moments into signals instead of red flags you talk yourself out of. Most buyers never slow down enough to do this. They're excited, they're ready, they've already justified the purchase emotionally, and once that happens, every answer sounds good enough. The checklist works only if you're willing to pause before committing. Not forever, just long enough to let the system prove itself. Because once you own the engine, the leverage disappears. You wait, you hope, you rationalize, you tell yourself the delay is temporary, the issue is rare, the fix is coming. And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but by then, you're already inside the outcome. The goal isn't to avoid budget outboards. The goal is to avoid fragile ownership. Engines that survive don't shout about it. They just keep going quietly, without asking for constant attention, without turning small issues into season-ending events. And engines that fail don't always explode. They just take too long. Too many calls, too much waiting, too much time lost to feel accidental. If you remember one thing from all of this, let it be this: ownership is a system, not a product, and systems either absorb friction or amplify it. The checklist doesn't care which engine you want to love. It only cares whether the system can carry that engine through the moments when things stop being simple. Once you start thinking this way, you'll notice it everywhere: in boats that quietly disappear from marinas mid-season, in listings that keep dropping price, in owners who say the engine is fine but never seem to use it anymore. That pattern isn't random, it's structural. And the next time you're standing in front of an outboard that looks like a deal, the question won't be whether it's cheap or powerful or well-reviewed. The question will be whether it survives everything that comes after the sale. Because the moment you sign, the checklist stops being a tool and starts being a story you're already living. And the difference between those two moments is where thousands of dollars quietly disappear or stay right where they belong.